The film begins with a depiction of a young man, named Jacob, and he is being bullied by some fellows. Jacob, like many other fellows, isn't a happy one. Rather, he used to be a sad and fearful. Jacob and his manager were on their way to Jacob's residence. In the meantime, he gets a call from his grandfather. He warns him not to return home since the house is under attack. Jacob thinks his granddad old, that's why he's speaking that way. To investigate, he rushes to house with his manager. His manager instructs him to contact him if a problem arises. When Jacob walks into the house, he notices the strewn luggage. It appears that something has happened here. Later, he notices that his grandfather is missing. He notices the back door is open, but his grandfather is not there. Later, he travels to the forest in search of his grandfather. However, he finds his grandfather, who has become fainted. When he notices that his eyes are absent, he feels terrified. It indicates that his eyes have been brought out by someone. He believes his granddad has passed away. He calls his manager for assistance, but his granddad awakens, and asks him that, "You have to go to an island in a time loop in 1943, there, you will find a bird dressed as a person, and will tell you everything." Jacob doesn't understand his grandfather's words. Later, Jacob notices a creature circling him and calls his manager. She pulls the trigger but she can't see anything. Only Jacob can see that monster. Jacob can't handle his grandfather's death, so he was referred to a psychiatrist. He explains to psychiatrist that his grandfather used to tell him stories about monsters, creatures and magical boys, and also a story about an island where magical children and monsters lived. Jacob was a child at the time, so he believed those, and that is why he wishes to tell others, but when he tells to his classmates, they make fun of him. As he grew older, Jacob's faith in those stories began to wane. He thinks those stories are made up, despite his grandfather's assurances that he would never lie to him. Jacob had a strained relationship with his father, so he lived with his granddad. His grandfather had recently passed away. Therefore, he was relocating to his parents' home. When he reaches there, a woman gives him a book that belonged to his grandfather. He discovers a postcard when he opens the book. This was a 2-year-old postcard. This postcard was written by a woman named Ms. Peregrine, in which she has written, "We are fine and happily living here. How are you doing? I and the children are missing you a lot." After reading this, Jacob gets shocked, because he had previously doubted these stories. After reading the letter, he begins to believe it can be possible that the island, the children, and Ms. Peregrine is real. His psychiatrist suggests his parents to take him for a vacation. Jacob's parents agree and Jacob plans to visit the same island. His father was a writer who writes stories on birds, so this isn't going to be a waste of time for him. There was a hotel where they could stay. Jacob is now on a mission to find the place where those magical children resided. The locals inform them that the place has now been destroyed, because the place was bombed by Germans during the war in 1943. Despite this, Jacob is eager to visit that area. After a while, Jacob reaches there and couldn't believe his eyes, as this location appears to be the same as his granddad has told. Later, Jacob notices a shadow of a girl, and after many other children. Jacob considers these children to be ghosts, and he becomes terrified. He slips while running and passes out. He awakens and sees the children standing in front of him. He says, "Are you dead or am I dead?" They reply, "No one had died. Ms. Peregrine has informed us that you will be arriving." They are attempting to place Jacob in a time loop. Jacob was running to his father since he didn't believe in anything. Jacob wasn't in his own time and had gotten stuck in a time loop. He arrived in 1943 when this place was a bar, and it is now a hotel. Everyone rushes up to him and asks, "Who are you?" They proceed toward him to kill him. The magical kids arrive there and save him. They destroy the bar before going. Jacob gets astonished and inquires whether I possess mystical powers. Have I totally demolished the bar? Meanwhile, an invisible youngster informs, "I, not you, who had done this." No one can see him without dress. All of these children later take Jacob to the child's home. After arriving, Jacob notices that the house is no longer devastated. It's in good condition, stable, and there's plenty of greenery. Later, Ms. Peregrine arrives and greets him warmly. Now Jacob believes his granddad's stories were true. Ms. Peregrine introduces him to other kids. They're all endowed with magical abilities. There was a girl who can communicate with the wind. She was light in weight and could fly into the sky. So she had to wear iron shoes, a girl with golden hair who can burn things, a boy who can give life to anything with the heart, and likewise there were lots of children. Every magical child lives in this child's house. Ms. Peregrine, who also lives there, looks after them all. She makes time loop in order to save them. Jacob expresses his desire to return to his own world. The children ask him to stay with them, but Jacob needs to leave immediately. Then kids ask him, "Okay, but first, let's have a look at the time loop with us, because it is fascinating." All of the kids come out with Ms. Peregrine. At the time, the German plane appears and throws a bomb on the house. Ms. Peregrine, on the other hand, with the help of her watch, manipulates time by stopping it and then resuming it. She rewinds the time before 24 hours. They lived for many years in this manner, and as a result, neither their ages nor their entry into today's world has progressed. There were more than one time loop, and to protect them, there are birds called protectors, who also protect children. Jacob returns in the year 2016 and had taken a letter from the past. He begins to read the letter, and in this letter, there was a warning about enemies becoming aware of the time loop. They will soon attack on Ms. Peregrine. He approaches Ms. Peregrine after receiving the letter. She scolds him for stealing and reading this letter. Later, a friend of Jacob takes him to the big and beautiful sea for visit. She later takes him to the depths of the sea to show him a massive ship having a box which was from Jacob's grandfather and that has a map in it. You have certain abilities, according to Jacob's friend, because no one can cross these loops without powers. A friend of Jacob reports that Ms. Peregrine is good lady and she protects us from the villain. He later witnesses a giant beast and he was attacking them, but Ms. Peregrine arrives and kills him. Can you see that monster? Jacob's friend asks. Jacob answers sure, but his friend informs we are unable to see him. This is your power, just like your grandfather. She takes him to Ms. Peregrine and she says, we were already aware of your abilities. Your grandfather, on the other hand, has determined that you will live among the regular people. And he was about to tell you on your 18th birthday. Later, she shows him a book of ancient history. She claims that we were well off, and that some of us wished to be immortal. It implies that they desired to enjoy an everlasting life. They conducted an experiment, and after holding a protector, they desired to be immortal with their abilities. This experiment was carried out by our villain, who failed miserably. They were unsuccessful, and despite being immortal, they turned into monsters. They are invisible, but only the main villain has found an antidote. If he eats the magical children's eyes, he will discover this. He'd eaten a lot of eyes and he became normal, but his other friends were still invisible. Later, we see a protector comes from his loop to Ms. Peregrine. She warns her that the villain and his companions, the monsters, have attacked on our loop. As a result, my entire children have been destroyed. Ms. Peregrine is told by the protector that she must create a new time loop because the villain is about to come here. Jacob gets confused by this, and returns to his own world. When he gets there, he notices lots of sheep without eyes. He also comes across the body of the hotel's owner, that was in horrible shape and reminded him of his grandfather. The villain approaches Ms. Peregrine to inform her. As he enters the time loop, another figure appears. Jacob reminds him you're not a regular human, because normal human can't arrive in loop. Do you have any exceptional abilities? He inquires. And this man, who is a psychiatrist, reveals his face. It was the same villain and was chasing Jacob in order to reach Ms. Peregrine. He goes to Ms. Peregrine's residence while squeezing Jacob's throat. He asks Ms. Peregrine to be his prisoner. Actually, the entire protectors can turn his companions into human-like visible, and that's why he was catching Mr. Peregrine. She agrees and bids farewell to her kids. Before she leaves, she warns Jacob that after me, you'll look after them and pledge to look after them. She then traps herself in his cage after coming into her real identity. Everyone begins to close their house to protect themselves from monsters. At that time, a dangerous monster arrives and kills the protector. Only Jacob was able to see the creature, and only he can attack him. The children runs from there to outdoors, but because Peregrine wasn't there, they couldn't change the time loop, and it was the day of the bombing. The German bomb attack and destroy the house after a while. All of the children safely exit the house and begin looking for Ms. Peregrine. They only have one ship that is placed in the depths of the sea. With everyone's power, they start driving the ship. Ms. Peregrine had to create a new time loop, and it was the present time loop of 2016. The villain, on the other hand, was seated in a hall with his companions. Jacob and the kids develop a plan for releasing the protectors. In addition, they must kill the villain. Jacob's friend asks the villain, "Get your bastards here, I will kill them all." The villain makes fun of them and sends his companions to pursue the kids. They throw ice and subsequently candies at monsters, causing them to become visible. One of them brings numerous skeletons to life. And the army of skeletons attacks and destroys each monster one by one. They eventually reach out to the villain, and while fighting the children seem losing, but then they kill all the villain's companions with their powers. The villain is stopped by Jacob's friend, and Jacob rushes to free the protectors. All of them were also incarcerated in those cells. Jacob then releases them, and then the villain appears and captures Jacob. When the other kids arrive, they notice that there are two Jacobs. The kids are perplexed as to who is the true Jacob. Both were attempting to reassure them, but Jacob sees a monster. The villain, on the other hand, is blind to the monster. The monster can't recognize Jacob, and he holds the villain and eats his eyes. Later, Jacob kills the monster with a weapon. The youngsters must now return into their time loop of 1943, because this was the 2016. They must adjust their age in order to return to their time loop. They are now saying their goodbyes to Jacob, who wishes to accompany them. But his friend forbids him to stay here as this time loop needs him. Now, Jacob was in 2016. All of the youngsters have passed through loop 1943. And they're in desperate need of a new loop, So Jacob goes back in time. He meets his grandfather few days before he died. He tells him everything that he'd seen till now. After listening to this, his grandfather says, "You shouldn't be here. You should be with her because your friend is waiting for you." He hands him the dollars of old times. With the help of his grandfather's map, he must travel through many loops. He joins Navy to reach into 1943. It was the time when his friend was on visit. We see Ms. Peregrine who wishes to return to her children, so she can take care of them forever. Film ends here. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.